You know, sometimes you read a news story and think, wow, that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Well, today we're diving into a situation that feels like it could be ripped from the headlines of an alternate reality.
Mm-hmm.
South Korea, a beacon of democratic progress in Asia, almost backtracked into martial law,
Yeah.
if only for a handful of hours. Thankfully, it didn't come to pass, but it's a stark reminder of how quickly things can change
Right.
and how fragile these systems can be.
Absolutely.
It also has some serious implications for democracies facing pressure worldwide, especially Taiwan. I'm joined by our expert today to break it all down. What makes this situation in South Korea so compelling from your perspective?
Well, I think it's a pertinent illustration of the inherent tension in democracies.
Okay.
You have this constant push and pull between individual freedoms and the need for stability, especially when a leader perceives threats, whether real or manufactured.
Mm-hmm.
And South Korea's case is really fascinating because it brings those tensions to the forefront in a very dramatic way.
Yeah. So let's set the stage for our listener. South Korea's president, Yoon Suk-yeol, shocked everyone by declaring martial law. Officially, he claimed it was necessary to counter anti-state forces with ties to North Korea.
Right.
But, as our sources reveal, this move didn't happen in a vacuum. Yoon was facing a whole mess of domestic problems.
Yeah.
A gridlocked budget, allegations of corruption swirling around his cabinet, investigations closing in. It's like the timing here just feels so crucial.
Oh, it does. Declaring martial law, especially in a country with South Korea's history, is a drastic step.
Right.
It essentially allows the military to supersede civilian authority,
Yeah.
restrict freedoms in the name of security, and potentially silence dissent.
Mm.
And the fact that this happened when Yoon was facing such intense political pressure raises some serious questions about his motivations.
Yep.
Was this a genuine response to a national security threat?
Right.
Or a calculated attempt to divert attention and consolidate power?
Yeah. So let's not forget, South Korea only fully transitioned to democracy in 1987.
That's right.
Martial law was a tool used by authoritarian regimes in the past. So this declaration from Yoon must send chills down the spines of many South Koreans.
Absolutely. For many citizens, this would brought back memories of a time when basic freedoms were suppressed.
Yeah.
1979, when martial law was last imposed, wouldn't be a distant memory for a large portion of the population.
Yeah.
This move by Yoon would felt like a giant leap backward,
Yeah.
a betrayal of the hard-won progress towards a more democratic society.
It just felt very familiar.
Yeah.
And the public's reaction was anything but passive.
Yes.
The sources described thousands of people rushing to the National Assembly, determined to stop this martial law order in its tracks. And it wasn't just a scattered outcry. It was organized resistance. The opposition leader, Lee Jae-myung, used live streaming to rally support and urge lawmakers to block Yoon's order.
Yeah.
It's remarkable here is the speed and effectiveness of their response.
Right. That's the incredible thing about the situation. It underscores the resilience of democratic values, even in the face of an existential threat.
Yeah.
The South Korean people, recognizing their hard-won freedoms were at stake, rose to the occasion. They didn't just grumble or post angry comments online. They took to the streets, organized themselves, and put direct pressure on their elected officials. So, really impressive.
The images from that day are striking.
Huh.
Our sources describe protesters pushing against lines of police, blocking military vehicles, even a woman lying down in front of a truck. Inside the National Assembly, it was pure chaos. Lawmakers determined to ensure a vote against the martial law order had to force their way in.
Wow.
Climbing fences, squeezing past armed guards. It really paints a picture of how high the stakes were.
It highlights that democracy isn't just a theoretical concept. It's something that people are willing to fight for, sometimes literally. And these scenes of ordinary citizens and their elected representatives putting themselves on the line to protect democratic processes, that's a powerful testament to the enduring strength of these ideals.
It's inspiring, honestly.
Yes, definitely.
And this wasn't just a one-sided affair either. It sounds like lawmakers from both sides of the aisle recognized the gravity of the situation. They barricaded themselves inside the assembly, using furniture to block doors, determined to prevent the martial law order from being implemented. That kind of cross-party unity in defense of democratic principles, that's incredibly heartening, wouldn't you say?
Oh, it's incredibly significant. It shows that even in a highly polarized political environment, there can be this shared understanding.
Yeah.
of the fundamental importance of democratic norms and institutions.
Right.
This willingness to set aside partisan differences in a moment of crisis, to prioritize the greater good of protecting democratic processes, that's a vital ingredient for a healthy democracy.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, it really underscores how fragile these systems can be, even in nations that seem to have a strong democratic foundation.
Right.
After a tense standoff lasting 6 hours, Yoon ultimately withdrew the martial law order.
Okay.
But the episode left a deep scar. There were calls for his resignation, and impeachment proceedings were even initiated. The trust was broken.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder. What happens when citizens aren't so vigilant or so well organized?
Right.
What happens when the institutions themselves are weaker? This brings us to the big question kind of lurking in the background of this whole situation. Taiwan.
Yeah. Taiwan is another democracy facing immense pressure, in their case from China, which claims Taiwan as its own territory. And while there are definitely differences between the two contexts, the South Korean incident raises some uncomfortable parallels.
Yeah, for sure. Especially, I think, for our listener who's, keen to understand the implications for Taiwan's future.
Works.
Let's break those down. What are the key similarities that jump out at you? The things that might keep someone in Taiwan up at night?
Well, both South Korea and Taiwan are relatively young democracies.
Okay.
Finding their footing in regions where geopolitical tensions run high.
Yeah.
They both face existential threats from powerful authoritarian neighbors who don't shy away from using military and economic coercion. And most importantly, both countries have leaders who could potentially exploit these external threats to justify limiting freedoms, clamping down on dissent, or even, as we saw in South Korea, attempting to impose martial law.
Yeah, those are some chilling parallels. But Taiwan has managed to thrive as a democracy despite these pressures.
Right.
What are some of the key differences, the factors that might make Taiwan more resilient in the face of this kind of threat?
Well, one key difference is that Taiwan's democratic system has had more time to evolve and mature.
Okay.
They've held direct presidential elections since 1996, compared to South Korea's first direct presidential election in 1987.
Right.
Taiwan also benefits from a strong and distinct national identity separate from mainland China. This identity is rooted in a unique history, culture, and language.
So this strong sense of Taiwanese-ness could make it harder for a leader to manufacture a crisis based solely on pressure from China.
Exactly. It would be much more difficult for a leader to convincingly claim that surrendering democratic freedoms is the only way to ensure survival when the population so clearly identifies as separate and distinct from the perceived aggressor.
Okay, that's reassuring, but it sounds like you're not saying Taiwan is completely immune to these risks.
Absolutely not. No democracy is ever truly safe. Complacency is the biggest danger.
Yeah.
The South Korea situation is a stark reminder that vigilance is key. It's the responsibility of citizens to be aware of the warning signs, to be ready to defend their democratic institutions, and to hold their leaders accountable, regardless of their political affiliations. And that vigilance, that active participation in safeguarding democracy, is crucial not just in Taiwan, but in all democracies, including the one our listener calls home.
Right, so that's a powerful reminder that democracy is a continuous process, not a destination.
Absolutely.
But it also feels a bit abstract. What are some concrete examples of that vigilance you're talking about? What should people be looking out for in Taiwan or elsewhere that might signal a slide towards authoritarianism?
Well, one warning sign is the erosion of press freedom.
Yeah.
When governments start cracking down on independent media, labeling critical reporting as fake news or anti-state propaganda, that's a red flag. Another sign is the weakening of checks and balances on executive power. If a leader starts bypassing established procedures, ignoring court rulings, or undermining the independence of the judiciary, that's a cause for concern.
So it's about paying attention to those subtle shifts in the political landscape, the seemingly small erosions of democratic norms that can, over time, have a cumulative effect.
Exactly. It's about being aware of those incremental steps that can lead to a more authoritarian system. Because often it's not a sudden coup or a dramatic declaration of martial law that undermines democracy. It's that gradual chipping away at its foundations. The slow but steady accumulation of power in the hands of the few at the expense of the many.
Yeah, and this is all starting to feel pretty heavy. What can ordinary people actually do to push back against these trends?
Yeah.
To be those vigilant citizens you described? It's easy to feel powerless in the face of these larger forces.
That feeling of powerlessness is exactly what authoritarian leaders rely on. But the South Korea case shows that even seemingly small acts of resistance can have a significant impact. Staying informed about current events, engaging in open and respectful dialogue with people who hold different viewpoints, supporting independent journalism, contacting your elected representatives, participating in peaceful protests. These are all ways to contribute to a healthy and resilient democracy.
So it's not just about grand gestures, it's about the everyday actions that reinforce those democratic values.
Precisely. Democracy thrives on participation. It's a collective effort, a constant conversation, a willingness to engage, even when it's messy or frustrating. It's about recognizing that our freedoms are not a given. They're something we have to actively protect and nurture.
This has been incredibly insightful. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to go back to Taiwan for a moment. We've talked about the parallels and differences with South Korea, but are there any specific lessons that Taiwan can learn from this near miss with martial law? What should they be doing concretely to strengthen their defenses against this kind of threat?
Well, one key lesson is the importance of civic engagement and a strong civil society.
Okay.
The speed and effectiveness of the South Korean public's response was remarkable. And that was largely due to a well-organized civil society with established networks for mobilizing people and putting pressure on the government.
So it's not just about having democratic institutions on paper. It's about having a vibrant and engaged citizenry that's willing to defend those institutions when they're under threat.
Absolutely. And that requires more than just showing up to vote every few years. It requires ongoing participation in the political process, a willingness to hold leaders accountable, and a commitment to defending democratic values even when it's difficult or inconvenient.
This is a crucial point, and one that resonates far beyond Taiwan.